In this episode, Brett and I speak frankly about trauma. Should you find yourself being triggered by this discussion, please honor yourself by pausing the show and returning to it when you're feeling more grounded. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
And I'm Brett Newcomb.
And you are here today to
talk about trauma.
Yeah. And when you sent this, just for full disclosure, back in the day when we did this, I would come up with these crazy exoteric ideas.
Oh, that you found in Psychology Today or
yeah,
Housewife magazine or
Bride.
Glamour.
One of them came from Bride.
Bride,
you were,
which I never let you forget.
Crazy about that. But when we started this over, when we did the redo,
when I committed to doing it again,
you said, "Oh, and I'm really going to try and be more involved in the production," and you have been. I mean, true to your word, you absolutely have been. So you've been sending a lot of topic ideas, and then you sent this one, and I loved the way that you titled it. You said you wanted to talk about how to heal trauma. And I love the idea of that because my conceptualization is that trauma is a very real biological phenomenon.
Yeah.
And that it requires healing the same way as any other disorder or disease.
So say more about that because we both agree that especially early childhood trauma creates a one trial learning situation for the brain. And the child then may move beyond that, forget about it, circumstances change, never happens again, whatever. But if later in life some similar adrenaline surge event causes a trauma reaction, the brain has that very entrenched pattern for responding.
Exactly.
And the body does what it did to survive initially, immediately. So it's almost like the adrenal gland. Your baseline for managing anxiety is fluid, depending on your coping mechanisms. And if you're hypervigilant because you have a trauma history, your baseline is set higher and higher, and there's less wiggle room for your adrenal gland, and you can get adrenalized, and it causes all kinds of problems. So as I understand it, that's part of what you want to talk about. But if I'm not getting that right, please explain it more.
Well, so there's two things that I would say about that. Number one is it isn't just one trial learning. One trial learning is a form that is most closely associated with what we would call post-traumatic stress disorder. I saw my buddy get blown up in an IED. That causes me to experience trauma that is very profoundly imprinted on the circuitry of my brain because of one experience. But chronic trauma over a long period of time can have the same kind of biological impact.
So my brother served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. And he was telling me years later that he and his buddies in his squad were at Da Nang Air Base, and they were drinking and smoking dope. And there was a missile attack from the Viet Cong. And the next thing they were in what they call a hooch, a hut. And the next thing he knew, he and his buddies were running down one of the runways of the airfield at Da Nang, just running. He said, we were laughing. We were high. We were drunk. We were just running. We knew bombs were going off. He said, I turned my head to say something to my buddy who was running next to me.
He blew up.
And I watched his head blow off. And he said, I've never had a drink since then. So for him, that was one trial learning. But my question, as I saw the rest of his life play out, is that whatever adjustment he made to that trauma, he managed to encounter so many more examples of trauma in his life that he did not handle well. And he ended up in prison.
Right.
And so I have a personal connection to the question, which I sent to you, which is how do we help trauma victims learn and survive?
So you can have this experience, or you can have this imprinting as a result of a single trial such as that,
Yeah.
or chronic trauma over a period of time. So you grow up in a household.
Well, and he had that as well. So it's just a lifetime of trauma experiences.
Right. And so then what happens, so in a household, you grow up and the parent who is otherwise doing the best that they can, but whenever you do something that you don't, that's an accident, right? I spilled my milk. Why'd you spill your milk? Well, so if you say, why did you spill your milk
I don't
to
know.
a child,
yes, you do.
The child
you
says,
know you
exactly.
Your milk because, yeah.
Exactly. The child says, I don't know, because they don't know why they spilled their milk. It was an accident.
Right.
But then the parent says, what are you stupid? Right. Okay. Now I know why I spilled my milk.
I think we both heard this.
Because I'm stupid. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And people hear this all
right.
and parents, and you say, oh, well, my parents were doing the best they could. I understand that. But it's that message chronically given to you over a long period of time that creates then the same kind of imprints in the brain. And the reason why this is important is because when you get these trauma engrams imprinted on your brain, what it does is takes the cortex now out of the equation. So in normal life, I get information in through the perceptive organs, and it goes to the cortex, which then processes it, which then sends information to my limbic system that says, this is the emotion that we need to generate, and this is the response that we need to manifest. When you have trauma, what happens is the cortex doesn't get involved in that mediation process. So the information goes immediately to fight or flight. And you don't have the ability to meditate on it. So when we talk about, people who have PTSD, and we're trying to help them to be able to regain, when we talk about the healing is being able to regain the ability to reincorporate my cortex into this mediation process. And that can take a long time. But when you're having a stress reaction, you can't do that. We've talked about this before. You can't have rational thought when you are in the throes of an intense emotional response.
Well, and that's what they do when you go in the military, and they try to train you and break down your learned response patterns to zero and build them back the way they want them.
Right.
Because they want you to be able
be an automaton.
If somebody says hit the ground, incoming rounds, you don't look around and go, what? Know, where? You immediately do what you've been trained to do, hit the ground. And then look up for information. But they want that reflexive response that they condition into you. And the same thing happens on the job. I mean, if you had that kind of a trauma history and people said you're stupid or whatever. I remember there was a summer when I was between high school and college that I worked for the railroad. And I was on the engine of the train, and I was supposed to get off while the train was moving and then go over to a switch and be ready to throw the switch to change the tracks.
So the train was moving slowly?
Well, it was slowing down. It had been moving at speed, and it was slowing down. And in the judgment of the engineer, who knew that I was a summer college student, he worked with grown men who did this all the time. And he made the judgment
of
that
when the train
it
was
slow enough and I should get off.
Okay.
And so he's yelling at me, get off now. So I step off the train, and I fell on all the rocks and across the other rails and stuff. And one of the other switchmen comes to me later, and he said, he shouldn't have done that, and you shouldn't have done that. Just because he said get off, I mean, he can actually stop the train and let you off. He doesn't want to, but he can. But until you learn how to do this safely, don't let anybody tell you to do this. And I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, well, that sounds really good, but can I do that? And he said, I said, will he listen to me? And he said, he will if you teach him. I said, well, how do I teach him? He said, the next time you're at the end of the train and you're giving him signals to back up to make a connection, don't give him the stop signal until he actually makes the connection. It'll knock him off his ass because the train will jolt and he'll fall off his seat. After that, when you give him a stop signal, he will pull the trigger right then. And so if you make a mistake, he has to wind it up, get it moving again. That's what you're getting paid for. Work safe. Do not let somebody tell. So part of what I learned was don't let somebody tell you. Work safe. Make your own decisions. that was a new learning for me, because I had been raised in a household where when I say jump, on the way up, you say how high.
Right.
On the way up,
Right.
you don't say why, you just jump.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember that dialogue with my father 1,000 times.
But so you've hit on the nut of it.
Yeah.
I mean, this switchman was giving you great advice,
Yeah, he was.
and that worked in that situation.
Right.
But clients are coming into our office and they're saying, "Well, but I don't have a choice. I don't have
Right.
the ability
Right.
to look at myself outside of myself and say, is this the right way to
Which
do
is
it?"
where you have to make interventions. I believe you. You don't have it.
Right.
But you can have it if. And so then you begin to discuss with them, how can you begin to acquire that ability? How can you slow this process down and reframe it so that you don't just have a red, green switch? You know, you can have yellow and blue and purple, so you have to choose among them, but you have to learn how to have them. And you have to learn which ones you want to have. And we can do that if you will work with me.
So, you know, when we talk about this, I'm reminded of Rambo. So the very first Rambo movie, Rambo First,
Yeah.
I think it was First Blood was the name of the movie.
Yes, it was.
And you
David
know,
Morrell wrote the book.
he's talking about he was in Vietnam. So he came back from Vietnam. He couldn't get a job, you know, driving a taxi, but he used to drive, you know, $1 million equipment over in Vietnam. And he's looking for the guy, and he's like, you know, we're going to go home. We're going to drive a car. But I can't find your legs. I can't find your freaking legs, right? And when people are in, and this is obviously a very dramatic presentation, but when people are in that situation, the intervention at that point is not, hey, think rationally, do multiplication tables. The intervention at that point is, okay, I'm here with you. We're in the trench together. I see, yes, man, we can't find his legs. That's horrible, man. His guts are all over the place. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And you have to walk them through the emotion until they get to a point where the emotion is less intense. And then we talk about what are we going to do now that we've been able to discharge that emotional energy. But we can't think rationally while we're having the emotion. Yes?
I don't disagree with you. I was just thinking, I think more commonly in my experience in dealing with trauma, especially sexual abuse survivors, was that while the sexual abuse was occurring, they were being indoctrinated that it was their fault. You made me do this. You're so sexual, you're so attractive, you're so whatever, that I can't resist you, and that's your fault.
Right.
And you've done this. And then very frequently people that survive sexual abuse will also have the interior experience of having had a pleasurable experience or release, an orgasm. And so then they say, oh my God, they're right, that was me. How could I have had that pleasure from that activity unless something was wrong with me? And so part of the conversation that you have to have with them over and over and over is whatever you did to survive, whether it felt good or didn't feel good, whatever you did to survive is what you needed to do. The responsibility for that is not on you, it's on the perpetrator. None of that belongs to you.
Oh, there's the duck.
Yeah, sorry.
I like the duck.
None of that belongs to you. And so when you get to a point where you can get them to hear that, then they can start to give themselves permission to say, okay,
right.
it's not me.
But when that person is in your office and they are having a flashback, we don't touch them. We don't try and intervene.
Put your
in
arms
that.
around them. You don't hold.
We just let them know, I'm here.
Right.
If you need me, I'm here. I will be with you for as long as it takes for you to get through this. But
You're
they
safe.
have to work through it.
It's not happening
and
now.
be safe.
It happened before. You've already lived through it. You're going to live through it this time.
And when we get to the end,
come up for air,
then we say,
see, I'm here.
None of this was your fault.
Yeah. Right. None of it's your fault. It all belongs to the adult. It was their responsibility. Whatever you did to survive, we want to respect and honor. Another way to frame that for them is like internal family systems and parts. You had a part that did what it needed to do to protect you and to survive. We want to honor that part and welcome that part. And part of what we want to do now is to say to that part, we lived through it. We lived through it because of your contribution. But now I've got the ball because I have more parts and more resources and more strength than you had. You could only do this to survive. Now we can make other choices. You still are, and you're still important, and we still need you to help us survive. But we also can frame it differently and see it coming differently and maneuver differently so that that doesn't happen.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'm genuinely interested in what your answer to this is going to be. But when I think of that, the way that I conceptualize it is Jung's idea of embracing the shadow. So Jung, people oftentimes get shadow work misconstrued because they think it's bad. It's not. The shadow is anything that you don't want to show other people. And so, but you have to be a fully functioning, incorporated individual, you have to be able to embrace all parts of the psyche. And so Jung talked about having to embrace the shadow, incorporate the shadow. So we want to take that part of you that protected you when you were a child, and we want to embrace that. We don't want it to, because what happens is that when you have these different parts, then they break off and they become encapsulated, and then that's what we call dissociative disorder.
Right.
Is when you have a part of your identity that is broken off and it's encapsulated and other parts of your identity don't have access to it. We want to embrace those parts. We want to integrate.
So when you have a dissociative episode or dissociative break, what happens is that your present self detaches and goes back to that isolated self, which is disconnected from reality. And so you can experience pain. People do surgery. They experience surgery, they give birth. There are all kinds of things that they can do when they learn how to dissociate. And so part of the message, again, for helping trauma victims heal is that dissociative process is not a flaw, it's a tool.
Right.
And it's a still usable tool that you can learn to use when you need it, but it's situational and it's not you.
Right.
And it's, again, not your failing because that's how you survive.
But my original question was, and then I got lost on it. No, I got lost on it. But do you believe that there are ever parts of the person or of the psyche that should not be reintegrated?
I don't think that's my call. And it's one of the questions in training clinicians that always comes up is how relevant and necessary is it to go back and remember every bad thing that ever happened? Do you have to remember each individual episode in detail and work? Because people with sexual abuse histories might have 100 episodes. Do you go back to each one, or do you just go back enough to understand this is what happened and it became a pattern, this is the way that you lived through it, and so these are our choices? I am not of the belief that you have to go back and re-experience every experience. I believe once you see the pattern, once you recognize the pattern, then you can begin to manage the pattern differently and make different choices from there. So I guess my answer to your question is no.
Yeah, and no, that's a good answer. And the part of it that actually was most helpful for me was this idea that you don't have to go back and relive every single
I just don't think
event.
so. I don't see the usefulness of that. And to me, it's re-traumatizing. Very
And it's
often.
not your call. It's the client's call. What
Yeah.
do you want to reintegrate? Are there any parts of you that you
One of the
don't?
places you really see this is when the client recognizes that they were sexually abused and they now want to go back and confront the person
Right.
that did it. And so they're now that I'm stronger, now that I'm healthier, now that I own myself, I want to go to find my grandpa and say, I know what you did, you son of a gun.
You know what you did.
And as a clinician, you say, slow down, go slow. What do you expect to be the outcome
Right.
of this? Because very likely what's going to happen is grandpa's going to say, I did not do that to you. You are lying. Why are you trying to destroy the family? We've always known that you're crazy, and you always have been.
And what's worse is that a lot of the family may support grandpa, not you.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because to acknowledge that they all know that grandpa's a jerk, then the family disintegrates. So you work through all those things. And part of the challenge for the clinician is, how do I support you in knowing the truth, but give you coping skills that allow you to navigate the future in ways that aren't as damaging? And give you the choice. You can do this, but what's the outcome going to be? What's it going to cost you? Are you willing to pay that? And now, is it your choice that you have to do this, or able to move on without it.
Right. And so I just want to make sure that we have a disclaimer. I will actually put this disclaimer also at the front of this episode. We talked about trauma in this episode. If you are experiencing trauma and you feel like you need to work through some things, we recommend that you call someone that is a professional who is in your area to be able to work through those issues, because it can be an incredibly delicate process. The reward can be profound, but it can be really hard.
And for what it's worth, from me, do it in person. Don't do it on Zoom.
Exactly.
Because the experiences that you're going to have can be very debilitating. And if somebody's in the room with you to make it safer, it's helpful.
Mm-hmm. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike and Brett.
Squeezed it too hard.
Well, I don't know if that was a setup or not, but I don't think I should respond to that.
I don't think so.